Good evening. Welcome to this World Space Week broadcast from the UK Space Agency. The theme of World Space Week this year is Women in Space. So we thought it'd be a great idea to meet some of the wonderful women we've got working in the UK Space Agency. Now, we're very lucky because about half of the people working in the Space Agency are women. So we've got plenty of people to choose from. But we thought one thing that would be really interesting to talk about is how space helps people on Earth. So we're talking today to Emily Gravestock. She is the head of space applications. And firstly, I'd like you to tell me, Emily, what exactly does that mean? What are applications? What do you do?
What do I do? Satellite applications are what we do with space data all the time that comes down from the satellites up in the sky to Earth, and things we can do with it to make life better here on Earth and improve things. That can be anything from how we do look at weather forecasting, the sat nav that's happening in our car, or it could be things as mad as drone deliveries of healthcare supplies, or looking at agri-tech or maritime things like that. So I work with companies to look at how we can use that satellite data to deliver services and products that actually everybody can use every day.
Brilliant. So it's not just about astronauts and getting to Mars or the moon, because we hear a lot about that with the launch to Mars next year of ExoMars, and we're getting involved in all sorts of unmanned missions. There was a mission to Mercury which passed Mercury only last week, I think. So there's lots of stuff of that sort going on. But what about things like climate change? I mean, that's one of the most important things we're hearing about now. Is that part of your job?
Climate change is phenomenally important, but I mean, so's the other stuff. So's the exploration and the science that comes from those missions. And at one stage, I could safely say I'd met more astronauts than I had politicians. Unfortunately, that's no longer true. But the astronauts are really cool and do a really important scientific job. But actually, taking the data from the satellites and doing things to do with climate change is really important. So we can monitor climate change from space. We can look at deforestation. We can identify where pollutants are gathering in different parts of the world. But then we can also do something about it. So if you can identify where these things are happening, you can then monitor them to help us on the ground to do something about it. So we look at air quality all the time from space. You can look at air quality right down to which side of the road you should walk on to have a less of an impact in terms of the air you breathe on your way to school or on your way to work every day. And we can work with people to do that, to make sure that they have less of an impact in what they do. We can work with people to make sure that they are impacting on the climate less by choosing the right electric vehicle, and work with them to work with electric vehicles to make sure they're charged in the right way to do that. We use satellites to help support how we are monitoring and looking after the photovoltaic, the solar platforms that we've got in the solar farms, to make sure that actually in the very large solar farms, we can identify which ones need maintenance and go out and fix them, so we can have the best possible outputs from those solar farms, so we can get as much energy from the sun as possible rather than burning more fossil fuels. So we're not just using the satellites to monitor the climate change, but then we can do something with that data too.
Okay, but it must be very important for monitoring as well. So how does all that work? I hear that there's quite a lot of things that are really hard to measure on the Earth that we can do better in space. Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, there's loads of things you can measure from space, some of which you would expect. So you can measure temperature from space. You can therefore get heat maps that look all over the globe at where's using the most heat. You can look at light pollution from space and identify where that light pollution is coming from and where the energy is being used from that way. There were some fantastic pictures that went up that you could find on the internet now that look at, actually, here are the emissions coming from factories before lockdown produced because of COVID and after lockdown done because of COVID, because you can look at those air quality emissions that come from space and those plumes that form. You can see oil spills from space. It was very interesting a few years ago when there was an oil spill in the Mediterranean. It was first identified by Earth observation satellites that meant we could get there really very quickly to actually hold that in, so that it didn't have the massive impact that it could have done on the climate and the ecology of the Mediterranean, which would have been far worse if it hadn't been spotted that soon. So we take this data and we do things with it, and that monitoring and that observation all of the time, that has a real difference.
So this is where scientists are getting the information that we all rely on to say what is going to be happening with, I don't know, ice cover, for example, on the planet. Because that must be really difficult to measure by sending people out or measuring the surface temperature of the sea. I can't imagine how many ships that would take if you wanted to do a measurement every kilometre across the globe, for example. So
See,
those are the
you can
sorts
do
of
it
things
from
that
both
happen.
from on the ground and from space. So if you take something like sea surface temperature or those atmospheric flows, that's done both from on the ground and from space. But equally, you can now do it. So we've got some really exciting technological advances happening now using space technology to help you monitor those things on the ground using those things. So, for example, we've got autonomous vessels now out in the oceans that are measuring temperature very regularly, that are measuring currents, but they're using satellite connectivity to know, and they're using satellite navigation services to know where they are, and then to use satellite communication from the middle of the oceans to send the data back, so that actually they're sending that data back in real time from where they are. And yet you haven't got people who have got to be at sea for weeks and weeks on end, because they can be piloted remotely from a bridge that is actually in an office building somewhere else. So we're doing those things in conjunction with the things that are on the ground to give those better indications and to make things more safe as you do that.
So just about anything, presumably that you can see on the ground from space, you can monitor what's going on. So presumably fishing vessels, you can see those from space, can you?
Absolutely, and fishing vessels is a really interesting example, because fishing vessels have certain patterns that they fish in depending on what they're doing. So if you're fishing, then and you're a trawler, then you'll usually have your signal on, which is called an AIS signal, that's monitored using satellite data, and it'll be going in a pattern like this because you're going back and forward to catch the fish. And then you've got patrol vessels that support the fishing vessels, for example, that have a different pattern because they go from one place to another boat to another to support those vessels that are doing that. And you can see that from space. And there are certain areas around the globe that, for example, you shouldn't fish in. And suddenly, if you're looking at those areas and you're going, hang on, there's a boat doing this pattern here, that's usually a trawler pattern. We need to go and check that one out and see what they're doing. Equally, because fishing vessels have to have their signals on when they're fishing, if you see a boat suddenly go dark and entering waters where they shouldn't be fishing, you can see that too. So we can not only see and kind of start to identify what things are happening, we can identify things that potentially shouldn't be happening too. But it's also the things that you can't see that are really exciting. So you can't see air pollution from space, but yet, sorry, you can see air pollution from space, but you can't see it. It's not a visible thing, but you can identify the gases that are there. But there's a really fun story actually, from a few years ago now, where we worked with some nuclear teams to identify a problem that they were having, which was jellyfish going into nuclear reactors. And they asked us, or a team of people, can you identify jellyfish from space? Right. Well, what do we think to this? So it turns out that jellyfish leave a trail behind them when they go, and you can identify that trail on the surface of the water. So you can track the route that jellyfish are taking in really quite very near real time, which could then warn a nuclear reactor to shut down before the jellyfish got there. Because if the jellyfish get into a nuclear reactor, then you've got a real problem of cleanup afterwards. So actually, this data was then really useful for the nuclear reactor company, because they could then say, actually, let's shut this reactor down before this jellyfish swarm herd, what's a group of jellyfish called, I'm not actually sure, this group of jellyfish come along, and then they can not have their nuclear reactor damaged and have to shut it down for cleaning for several days. But then you get the bonus bit of that, right? Who wants jellyfish? It turns out that jellyfish actually are contain a lot of collagen in what they're made up from, and they're one of very few animals that are not banned by any of the religious texts. And collagen is used in a lot of makeup, so suddenly the makeup companies want to access the jellyfish and know where they are, so they can catch the jellyfish to get the collagen to make their makeup that can then be used by women all around the world.
That's amazing. And who'd have thought the space was the thing that brought
Exactly.
those ideas together? The thing I was interested in, you mentioned about being able to spot people spilling oil and people who are illegally fishing and so on. So it'll be very difficult for bad guys to hide if people are watching from space. But what about the opposite? When something bad has happened, we want to help. Is
Mm.
there an opportunity to help people with natural disasters and so on? You know, earthquakes or tsunamis or whatever?
Absolutely. So I'm very lucky and privileged to sit as the UK rep for the International Charter for Space and Major Disasters. And that's exactly what we do. We look at how we can provide space data and services to response. In the response and recovery immediately after disasters. And so those disasters could be anything. They could be earthquake, tsunami, hurricane, floods, landslide, whatever it may be. Within hours of those things happening, you can then identify what was there before by taking a satellite image from what was there before and what is there now, and then do a very quick change detection map to go, actually this used to be there and that is now there, and therefore these services, these things have gone. Nighttime pictures are really useful because they show where power is or power isn't because of what lighting is being used, for example. But equally, the daytime pictures showing which roads are blocked, showing which areas have just been completely swamped, and therefore where you need to send help most quickly because you can identify whether or not people are there or not. So that's really exciting, to be able to do in that support capacity really very quickly afterwards. And if you take something like the massive tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami, more than a decade ago now, the disaster charter for that not only provided an awful lot of imagery straight afterwards, but then provided that imagery as laminated maps really quite quickly on the ground, so you could hand those things to people on the ground. That so there was a really practical use of getting out there to help the response and the recovery in those instances.
Wow, so there's lots of things you can do there. There's a great question here, going back to our question about jellyfish and things.
Yeah.
Rosie Eccleston is asking, is that data also available to help conservation scientists, i.e. changes in migration patterns, etc.? I mean, I can imagine, for example, maybe you can see whales if you can see jellyfish. Presumably you can see other things too migrating.
You can't actually see the jellyfish. You can see the trail that the jellyfish leave behind them because they happen to leave a trail behind them like slugs do on the ground, but jellyfish leave it on top of the sea. So we can't actually identify the jellyfish, but we've got this other thing that we can identify to say that's where jellyfish were. Yes, you can see whales from space. In fact, I've worked with a company who have been identifying whales to help support the reduction in the hunting of whales, for example. So you can do that.
Oh,
You can also do things like you can we're working with another group who are doing wildlife conservation by having satellite connected cameras that are just motion detection cameras, and then they're using AI, artificial intelligence, within those cameras to identify what wildlife they've seen, and the satellite connectivity is sending that information back. Doesn't just identify if they've seen an animal, it identifies if they've seen a human in an area in a wildlife reserve that humans shouldn't be, for example, indicating there may or may not be poaching or something going on, and so you can send in people to support that. Is that data available publicly? There is plenty of satellite data available publicly through the Copernicus route, which is the European Space Agency and European Union group of satellites that provides satellite imagery that is available for free. You can download a picture of wherever you like every time an image is taken, for example. And there's a variety of other free satellite imagery available out there. But then there's an awful lot of imagery that you can also pay for that's in much higher resolution, for example. So the imagery that's available for free can get you so far and does a really good job of providing that bigger picture piece. But if you want to get to the imagery that is really down to the every few meters, that generally has to be paid for. But there are ways of doing this. If I think the question goes on to say, are we looking at using this for conservation, changing in migration patterns and things like that? You can go on and do that and utilize that data for that. But it won't just be the satellite imagery that would support that. You can look at conservations and migration patterns through other identifiers. I think we might have a problem with connectivity because Jeremy has frozen for me. So I'm going to have a look down the comments and see if there's some comments in the chat that we can do that. So is the data accessible to all or is it restricted? There's plenty of data that is accessible to all. It's not restricted from the point of view of access. You just have to sign up to a portal, and to get to that portal, it's called the CDAS portal. It's hosted by the Satellite Applications Catapult in the UK, which just happens to be the building I'm sat in right now. So I'm just answering Alistair's question, Jeremy, about is the data accessible or is it restricted, that's in the chat. And I'm saying that actually it's accessible through the CDAS portal on the Satellite Applications website.
that's great. The questions have actually disappeared from my screen for a moment, but nevertheless, we've got plenty of other things to talk about. So what you've been saying then is very much that we use uh, imagery from space. I think you've implied all kinds
Mm-hmm.
of sensing of different parameters from space, temperature and wind speed and things of that sort. You've obviously mentioned that we must be measuring positions of things if we know
Yes.
where ships are. Um, so how does that work? How do you actually get the position of something on the surface of the Earth from space? What's going on?
That's a very good question. So back in school, when I was learning my trigonometry with my triangles, I didn't really see what this had to do with the price of fish, quite frankly. Turns out it's got quite a lot to do with satellites and things like that. Because if you know where one thing is on the ground and you want to get somewhere else, but you need to know exactly where something is, you can use satellites to do that. So if you I'm in a location here. If I want to know how to get to where you are, Jeremy, I can do a trigonometry triangle. So I can go from my point here on the ground to at least 4 satellites and get those lines up. And where those things intersect is where I am. So where we send that data point to, then goes up to the 4 satellites, and we intersect down here. You use basic trigonometry in your of your triangles to go, actually, therefore, if she's there against these satellites, which we know where they are in the sky, then we must know where that is. Now, each of those navigation satellites that's up there, each of those GPS satellites that's up there, or it could be a different navigation constellation that's up there, contains clocks, contains multiple atomic clocks, so that we can make sure that we know exactly what time we are. Because actually, the thing you need to know is the timing between how long it takes to get from that satellite to me on the ground, so that you can then do your trigonometry. So instead of a distance, it's going to be distance and time. So you can go, actually, this is where Emily is, and you've got the timing that is there. And the timing then gets really valuable, because the timing means that you can run things on a precise mechanism, because you know exactly when something happened, because you've got those atomic clocks on those satellites that are running as well as they possibly can to the hundreds of billionths of a second, running those clocks from satellites. And we use that timing all of the time. And it becomes really vital to use that timing, because if you're going to make banking transactions, if you're going to monitor the speed of Formula One cars, if you're going to do all of that, you have to be absolutely exact. And the atomic clocks, because they're in a near gravity environment and they're not very disruptive while they're up there, can offer you that precision within the timing. And so it gives you those timestamps of exactly when data was sent up and data is sent down, timestamp. And then if you are making a financial transaction where the cost of something is changing, you've got that exact timestamp, whether it's before the data changed or after. If you're monitoring exactly when a Formula One racing car or something else that's very quick passes a certain point, you know exactly who passed that start finish straight, first or second.
So I've heard that if we switched off satellites, things like the
Yeah,
internet would stop working and the electricity grid would stop working. And I think it's all because of this timing thing you've just been talking about. I
it
still
is
find
all
that
because of
quite
that timing
amazing.
thing. Well, it's really important that we get
Okay.
timing right, you see, for these things, because digital radio broadcasts are all using GPS time to ensure that the bits in the radio stations all arrive at the receivers absolutely in lockstep. Because if you don't have that arriving at exactly the same time, then you're going to get a scrambled signal. And so these timing points are absolutely vital. We have to have them there. So and it's available for free, and we do it so it can provide for everyone absolutely consistently. We have it free so that people can track, update, manage multiple transactions at once in a very high throughput way and in a secure way, because the security of those comms and those timing systems that go up and down are really important.
Wow. So that's really amazing what's going on with these satellites, which are all in sort of medium Earth orbit, I think, aren't they?
By
So
and
that's
large, they're
sort of
a few hundred kilometers up,
20,000
but
kilometers, isn't it?
yeah.
But we've got satellites that are much closer to Earth doing things in space. Can you say anything about? I've heard that we're starting to think about manufacturing stuff in space. I mean, we do experiments in space, but
We do.
manufacturing, really?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we've already got things that go up there and are then deployed when they're up there. So there's some amazing antenna and things like that, which unfurl themselves once they've got to space to make sure that they can actually go up in the smallest possible package and then unfurl to become huge antenna once they're up there. And there's some amazing videos of that happening. But yeah, if you can manufacture stuff in space, actually, when you think about a rocket launching, it's juddering all over the place, and it's a huge thing that's going up and is a very unstable environment. And then when the satellite gets to space,
Mhm.
it's this beautiful, calm microgravity environment with a bit of space debris around, but actually very little to interfere with it. If you can manufacture something in space when it's already up there, you could take up all the component parts, then put them together once you're there. The satellite actually has to have far less packaging around it when it goes up and be far less robust, because it no longer has to deal with the nightmare of actually the rocket launching it up into space. It's just got to be able to do its job once it gets up there. So yeah, we're getting to that point where we can start to manufacture things in space really very well, so that we can deliver that and therefore reduce the waste of that rocketry launch and things like that, so we can then do things even more in a more environmentally friendly way, but also in a more sustainable way for the longevity of the program once it's up there. Because also once you're manufacturing in space, you can fix stuff in space as well, and you can then start
Yeah.
editing things once it's in space as well. We've got this amazing satellite that went up in the summer called Quantum, which we've built through the European Space Agency with a whole bunch of British companies. And it's the first satellite that's gone up that you can actually reconfigure once it's in orbit. So most satellites, when they go up there, do what they're told to do, and they get programmed before they go, and they do what they're told to do. Quantum is an astonishing satellite because actually you're going to be able to edit what it does once it's up there. You're going to be changing its flight path. You're going to be changing the amount of data it sends down in different ways. You're going to be changing the uh, the orbit that it's in, the rotation that it's in, so that it actually can deliver one thing for 12 hours a day, and then the following day can deliver something else, depending on what is required of it on the ground. And that's got about a 15-year lifespan. And the ability to tweak things once they're up there to make that a really sustainable program is fantastic. Because if you think what we were using satellites for 15 years ago, yes, we were using them for comms and timing, but actually such a much more limited range of things than we are now. 15 years hence, goodness only knows what we'll be using them for, and it's a really exciting prospect.
So anyone at school today may one day be commissioning things that are actually built and operated in space rather than from the ground. I mean, I used to, as an engineer, I used to build stuff that went into space, and we obsessed about how to make things strong and light so they could survive launch and still work in space, knowing that nobody could ever go along and fix them if they went wrong. So what you've just
Mm-hmm.
described sounds to me like a dream come
It's
true.
phenomenal. The technological advancement is just amazing.
I'm going to have to stop talking about all these fascinating applications because I hear you've had quite an exciting week this week. Can you tell us about your TV appearance yesterday?
Absolutely. Well, I think that if anyone was ever told that they could appear on Blue Peter and get themselves a Blue Peter badge, everybody would be right up for it. Yeah. Well, yesterday I had that amazing opportunity of being on Blue Peter. Tim Peake was on Blue Peter as well. And we got the privilege of announcing and launching a new competition on space, which is the Awesome Orbit competition that Blue Peter are doing. And what that's all about is thinking about what satellites can do in the future and what you would like if you were designing a satellite to make it do. And unfortunately, Jeremy, I think you're just outside the Blue Peter age range of 6 to 15. But we're asking people, sorry, we're asking people to come up with ideas of what they would like their satellite to do, to name it with a maximum of 3 words, and to design it an emblem or a logo. And a satellite will actually be named that, engraved with that logo, and be sent into orbit and be there for quite a lot of years delivering the services. Not the services necessarily that have been described in the what would my satellite do in the future, because this satellite's already under development and being programmed, but to actually go out and be a named satellite for the future. It's really exciting.
Wow. So to find out, you need to go to the Blue Peter website, and they've got all the details on there. That sounds like a brilliant
Details are on the Blue
competition.
Peter website, but you get to then go to the launch party with In-Space Missions down in Hampshire, who are actually building this satellite. You're going to get to drive the ExoMars rover down in the yard in Stevenage, which is a replica of the thing that's actually going up to be on Mars to get the samples, the back, and things like that. There's astronauts involved. It's a really exciting opportunity to think, actually, what could satellites do in the future?
I bet you've chosen that age range so that people like us in the space agency can't enter because we'd love to do that. That would be brilliant.
We would absolutely love to do that. It's a really exciting opportunity. And the prize list, as I was working with colleagues to get involved with developing this, was just extraordinary. But what was really lovely, and I think, Jeremy, it says an awful lot about our sector, is that every single person we said, actually, would you like to offer a prize towards this competition? Um, would you like to get involved in supporting young people getting into space? The answer was yes, from every single one, because there is such generosity of our sector of actually wanting to support young people getting into it.
Yeah, now there's some brilliant things to do. In fact, there's a question just come in about what somebody doing their A levels can do. So, yeah, it's challenging because it'll be so much fun to do work experience. But
Can I
basically, what I
answer that
would
one?
do is to yeah, please do.
Because we've got
Yeah.
another, so every year I've been really lucky that I've also had the privilege of running a satellite competition, which is a national competition that the UK Space Agency runs, that opens in January, closes in March, and is from people aged from 11 to 22. And we are running that again this year, and that's going to be for cash prizes of what you would like to do for what. It's a very similar question: how would you use satellites to improve life here on Earth? But it takes it a step further, and you then get to present those ideas to industry experts from the Space Agency and from the European Space Agency and from industry who could actually help this become a reality. And they will really challenge that idea. But that's coming up in January. Right now, the Blue Peter one is open, which is actually getting to engrave and name a real satellite. And there's a question there: what type of satellite is it? It's a small sat, and it's going into low Earth orbit, and it's got a variety of different instruments on board, and the engraving will be on the outer casing of the satellite, on the metal outer casing of it. So it'll be there for
That,
everybody to see.
that is so cool. Now, look, I'd like to know a little about your background because, if you want to get a career in space, it's quite useful to see what other people have done. So, what were you good at when you were at school?
Making friends. What was I good at school? I had a really
That's a
enjoyable
good list.
school life. And I was a bit musical, and I did science A levels because actually what I wanted to be was a doctor. And I had a place to read
Mhm.
medicine at medical school, and I got the right number of UCAS points, but the wrong letter combinations to go and study medicine. And so I took a gap year and investigated the world a bit, and then accidentally fell into a degree in geography with theology, um,
Wow.
which is not what you'd expect for someone in the space agency. So I actually have an arts degree rather than a science degree, although I came from science A levels. So
Well,
I,
quite a lot of people with arts degrees in the space
we
agency. I mean,
do.
we've got people who have things like archaeology as well, and people who have done economics and politics and all sorts of things. So how did you end up working in space then?
So I joined the civil service and found out that we had a UK space agency. Did a GCSE in astronomy as an evening class because actually I got interested in space, and then went right. I'll go and work for the UK space agency because actually the space sector in the UK is growing at such a rate of knots, and I was starting to see things about space all around. And I thought, well, why not go be a part of that? And if I can do that from the civil service, then fabulous. But actually, who can I work with to do that? And so I came in across the UK space agency and have been here just shy of 6 years and have yet to get bored, which for me is quite a feat because you asked what I was good at school and how that progressed. My career has purely been about following the fun, because I have a tendency to enjoy what I do and laugh quite a lot about it. And so I get out there and I find those things that are going to interest me, engage me every day, and actually working with companies right from the tiny two or three people who have got a cracking idea and want to take it forward to the very, very large primes that I work with on 10 contracts that are worth tens of millions, the variety that's in that scope, but every single one of them with a passion for what they do and a passion to use space data and services to do something that will make a difference, but also bring money into the UK economy, is just such a privilege.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've always noticed is there's a lot of people working in this sector who are just passionate about what they do. It makes it really very exciting. I think. What's the most exciting thing you've done in the space agency? Do you think?
Apart from Blue Peter. I
Well,
mean, that was
okay,
pretty
that's fair
cool.
enough.
Do you know what?
Pretty good
The most
answer.
exciting thing for me, because I look after the arena of applications and space applications, for me, one of the things that I have found most exciting to see grow is in my second year in the job, we put together a networking event where we invited anyone who wanted to come talk space applications to come along. And we had a venue for 350 people, and we were oversubscribed and we had to turn people away. Last In January this year, we held a virtual event for over 1,300 people. And the fact that this sector is growing and people are passionate about what we do and want to come together to talk about it, but not just to talk about it, to support each other and make those connections, is such an exciting thing for me to see. And as I look around the room at these events, there are people of every age range. They come from all across the country. There are men, there are women, there are people from all ethnicities, there are people who come in wheelchairs. There are people who come with a guide. There's some people who come. Two people last year came with a guide dog. The last one we held in person, and actually to see that the downstream sector of space is open and accessible to all, because we need project managers, we need people who are good at business, we need people who are good at marketing, we need people who have got the ideas of what they want to do, and then the people who can take it forward. Actually, that's really exciting for me to see the growth in that sector and how people want to engage with it and work with us as an agency. But none of this would happen without the hardware that's up in space. But without what we're doing down on the ground, the hardware in space is just space junk.
Yeah.
So
Now, you mentioned the word downstream there without
I
explaining it.
did,
So we should
sorry.
say that downstream is everything that uses space on the ground, basically, whereas upstream is building satellites and operating them. So just in case that wasn't clear, we're nearly out of time, really. So I think we need to call it a halt. But do you have any advice for people to join the space sector? I mean, you've talked about how good it is making friends with people. You've talked about all these differences between people, but there must be some things everyone tends to have in common, whether they're maths graduates, whether they're engineers like me, or people who have done the interesting mixture of geography and theology like you. Um, what have they got in common? What should people be aiming to do if they want to come and work in the sector?
I think the sector has people of, as you've just described, people of all flavours, of all backgrounds, of all skill sets. What we have in common, I think, in this sector is a desire to push the boundaries, a desire to push the boundaries of what is possible, both technologically up in space, but also with what is the possible with the data that is available, and using that. Passion, that excitement, that desire to get stuff done is actually something that I think is common between most people that are working in the sector that I've come across. I found very few lazy people, very few people who are prepared to sit back and go, actually, this is the way we've always done it, therefore that's the way we're going to keep doing it. Because actually, it's a very noticeable place. This is a place for innovation, a place for progression, and a place that actually people can get involved from all different walks of life.
So we recommend that getting started in space, if you get involved in some of the organisations that are doing stuff. So when you're a student at university, there's a student group called UK SED, so that's Students
Mhm.
for the Exploration and Development of Space. There's a space camp that anybody can take part in. There's several different age groups, so whether you're doing A levels or whether you're doing GCSEs or whatever. So that is not has not been running this year, but next year we hope it'll be back on again. We don't run that, but you'll find it easily enough if you do a search. If you want to know more about what sorts of things you can do, then do go to the UK Space Agency's website. We've got an area there with information for students and for teachers and so on, with lots of links into other organisations that do stuff. For the question about what we do for people in terms of placements, frankly, we run a big office or several big offices. It's not the sort of place most people would really want to come and do a placement, but there are so many companies and organisations that do. So it's well worth seeking those out.
Oh, Jeremy's frozen again. Some of the companies that do that operate through a something we call the SPIN program. So if you were to Google SPIN space placements in industry, then that would also come up because they are right across the sector. They're with industry, they're with various different areas that can cover off those, and they are university internships by and large, but they're available for people in that kind of age range. We don't, as the UK Space Agency, have much going on that we offer during in terms of work experience or A levels because we're a government department, and actually, as Jeremy's just said, we run a few major offices, so that was good. Hamad, you've asked a question in the chat about the satellite competition. There's the Blue Peter one that's open right now, which is the Blue Peter's Awesome Orbit competition. That one's all the information is on the Blue Peter website. If you're interested in the one for slightly older children or young people, then if you were to search Satellite on the UK website agency website, that would be found there. Um, Another question in the chat. James, your favourite subject is maths? Fantastic. We've got great mathematicians who look at books like this one that's beside me, Space Systems Engineering, who really work out the precision and the data of where satellites are going to go and how they go. And engineers, mathematicians, physicists, all very welcome, but as are loads of other skill sets as well. It would be great to have you come work here in the future. We're headquartered in Swindon, but we have offices in London. We have offices in Harwell in Oxfordshire, which is where I am right now. We're on a space campus here in Harwell, which has over 100 space companies based on it as of now. ESA is the European Space Agency, is over my left shoulder. I've spent some of my time there this afternoon. I've been to visit 4 different companies on campus today to see what they're up to and to talk to them about how we can support them. So we have a variety of locations, although like everybody in the last 18 months, we've had to spend time getting to know about how we work remotely and things like that, which has been really interesting. I don't know if we're going to get Jeremy back or not. But if you do want to find out more about what we do, then the gov.uk website has lots of information about the UK Space Agency, as does the UK Space Agency's Twitter feed, Instagram, Facebook posts, and things like that. And so you can always find out more information there. Hamad, another question. Which university is collaborating closely with the UK Space Agency? We have lots of universities that work with us, both from an academic research point of view and also working with us as part of projects that are looking forward to do commercial and innovative things. So it would be harder probably for me to give you a list of it would be easier probably for me to give you a list of universities that we're not closely working with, because actually we work with dozens and dozens of universities in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England, in all of them. So there's lots of opportunities there to get involved from university points of view to working with us here. There's some really exciting things going on in the Glasgow region around actually building satellites, if that's something that people are interested in, or we can get involved all around the country. Jeremy, I've been answering questions from the chat.
Well, thanks
Welcome
for
back.
that. I'm afraid my internet died. I'm on a different connection, which is really slow. So I was just trying to bring things to an end so that people can get their evenings back. But what I was encouraging people to do was to look on our website where we've got information about what you can do, where you can get involved. If you're a teacher, there's resources. If you're a student or anybody else, you can find out about how to do stuff during the summer and where else to look. And do look on the Blue Peter website for the details of the competition that Emily was talking about. So I don't know whether you heard me, but I really wanted to thank Emily for a fascinating chat. That was really, really interesting. Honestly, I've known you for so long, and there's so many things that I've learned this evening by talking to you. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks so
Um,
much for
and
having me.
and anybody watching, I look forward to meeting you one day when you come and work in the space sector. We're desperate for people with imagination and good ideas, so do come and join us. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of World Space Week. Bye.
Bye.